I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the truth, good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Matt Bernico, your co-host on this podcast. And also, I'm out here wearing a mask. Not right now, but if I went outside, I'd wear a mask. That's what I'm trying to say.
I'm Dean Detloff, also your co-host, and I too wear a mask when, on the rare occasion, I even leave my apartment.
That's a good point. I'm talking a lot of big game here about my mask, and I haven't left my house for a few days. So maybe I should shut up about it.
We're really all missing a lot of opportunities to become vigilantes, I feel, in this particular moment. And I hope we don't lose that opportunity in the end.
Yeah, me too. My 5-year-old son has a, Shredder from Ninja Turtles.
I know him.
You're familiar. He has a Shredder mask and he likes to wear it. And every time we go somewhere, he tries to convince me that the Shredder mask is going to be good enough to wear outside. And I want to believe him, but he's got to wear a regular one.
It was good enough for Shredder. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. You never see Shredder sick from any kind of diseases. So his mask must be working.
Yeah, that's right. The turtles put it on exactly the wrong part of their face, but Shredder, he puts it on the right part.
Not on your eyes, you big dumb turtles.
Why you would ever put a headband on your eyes, I don't know. All right, this is derailing really quickly. We need to find the thread for this episode fast. And look, here it is. I've picked it up. This past week on July 24th, it was the birthday of Ammon Hennacy. If you've never heard of him, Hennacy was a Catholic worker. He was a wobbly. He was a war resistor. He was a bizarre kind of Christian, and he was also an anarchist. He's commonly referred to as a one-man revolution, which is also how he described himself, which is very funny.
That's why they referred to him like that.
Yeah, exactly. And he was someone who felt really strongly, to put it lightly, about following his conscience. And he really encapsulates kind of the core of Christian anarchism, TM.
That's right. And because of the anniversary of Hennacy's birthday, we thought it'd be an interesting thing to stop and take a look at Hennacy's life and witness and figure out what, if anything, is important for the contemporary Christian left. I mean, maybe there's nothing. But who knows? Ammon Hennacy is this extremely, I want to say strange, but that's not the right word. Eclectic kind of figure, maybe. I was extremely motivated by him when I was a lot younger in my more Christian anarchist days. He is such I think he has some very compelling lines, but is also kind of an enigma when it comes to politics in the United States.
Yeah, I feel the same way. He was a big deal for me when I was a teen, thinking about Christianity and anarchism. I remember there was a wiki page about him. I guess this must have been in 2007 or 8 or something. And I was reading it, and there was some entry that still stuck out in my mind about how he became a Christian. He was an anarchist first, then he became a Christian, and I was like, nice, great. And then he became a Catholic, and I was like, okay, that's really interesting. And then he left the Catholic Church, and I was like, oh no. But then it said he was a non-church Christian, and I was like, cool. He's still cool. Back when I was a weird, extremely bizarre evangelical anarchist. So he's got that kind of appeal, I think.
Yeah, totally. He's kind of all over the map throughout his life, but pretty interesting just the same. He is a character. I don't know. Before we started the show, Dean and I were trying to figure out if there was anyone else in the United States in that was like him in any way, and I don't think that there is. He's just like this extreme force to be reckoned with. But like pretty interesting just the same. So in this episode, we're going to talk about him and kind of figure out what he was about and if there's just like anything there that's like still really cool to us. Maybe just a fun story. That's fine with
I'll
me.
say this much. I think we could at least one of the immediate payoffs, I think, would be something similar to the episode we did on Benjamin Lay, which is to
Yeah.
say, this is a person who is extremely idiosyncratic, very like unrepeatable is the word that comes to mind for me. Somebody who you could never have two of these kinds of people in the world, but nevertheless leave behind some really interesting experiments, and their life itself testifies to the really creative, interesting, strange things that you can get up to if you're a Christian on the left.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison. Comparing Benjamin Lay and Ammon Hennacy is something I'm probably gonna keep doing throughout this episode. Not that they were like, I mean, they were both born Quakers, and you can make those kinds of biographical connections, even though that's about it. Um, but I think there's like a lot of things that kind of draw them together as types of characters that sticks out to me, like about these two people, Ammon Hennacy and Benjamin Lay, is that they both have this like real strong reliance on their conscience and just like they're gonna do whatever their conscience tells them to do, and like even if it completely alienates them from other people, they're gonna do it. And man, it's something I really admire about them, and something that it's a strength and maybe a life skill I do not possess myself.
Yeah.
But it's cool. It's cool to see how people work that out, and just that like, man, you can just believe things and it's fine. Surprising sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Also, they both Lay and Hennessy, they have this sort of willingness to like ruin their normal life if it means being true to their own convictions, which I think is
Yeah.
also very, impressive. Whatever kind of weird political disagreements you might have, you can't really deny that that's a really heroic thing to do. They're both vegetarians, so there's that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just that they are two people that believe something fiercely, and I think that's something to I don't know, that I like particularly. Well,
Yeah.
let's get into a little bit about Ammon Hennacy and like what he's about, and we'll kind of go through it a little bit. So the way this episode's going to work is we're gonna read this article that's kind of interesting about him, that kind of outlines more of the things that he did in his life that kind of can give you an idea of like the sort of contours of his life a little bit, and then we're going to look at some things that Dorothy Day wrote about him, and kind of give the sort of Catholic leftist texture to his life. So then we'll bring it all together and kind of see what we have at the end of the show. But yeah, to start off, we're going to kind of pull some things from an article that was in the Salt Lake Tribune. That's me supporting local journalism. The article is called 50 Years Ago, a Catholic anarchist tried to help solve homelessness in Salt Lake City. Here's what happened. It's an article written by someone named Jeremy Harmon, and it's from 2017. It's a cool article for a lot of different reasons. It's first of all just like good journalism about history, but also there's a lot of like really badass pictures in it that are kind of drummed up from an archive. Lots of cool pictures of Ammon Hennacy um, doing his thing, picketing. There's a lot of cool stuff. So I love that. I'm a sucker for good histories. That's what I like. This is one of them.
Any black and white picture of someone with a sandwich board.
Yeah, that's right. Black and white pictures of people with a sandwich board is it's my vibe. That's on my sandwich board. Okay, I'm gonna just kind of start, and I'm gonna read a chunk of this to kind of get to thrust us into the exciting parts of Ammon Hennacy's life, and then we'll kind of talk about what happens next. Okay, so the article says this: the neighbors couldn't leave their houses without getting hit up by panhandlers and homeless men who had been using both the front and backyards of 1131 Southwest Temple as a bathroom. Ammon Hennacy was inviting as many as 40 transients a night to sleep there, offering his house as the only homeless shelter in Salt Lake City that didn't charge a fee or limit on how long anyone could live there. It wasn't uncommon for cops to drop drunk men off at Hennessy's place if there wasn't room at the jail. It was 1965, and his neighbors were frightened and angry. Their experience is what today's Simpson Avenue residents feared earlier this year, as they successfully fought a 150 bed shelter proposed for their street. So this kind of tying it in to this was in 2017, some kind of current events going on there. But this is kind of like what Ammon Hennacy is really well known for. He was a Catholic worker. He was a draft dodger. He was a tax resistor. He was a war resistor. All of these things. And he was, Catholic worker in New York with Dorothy Day. And I mean, his life has tons of stuff going on in it. But Dorothy Day inevitably sends him to Salt Lake City in Utah to start a Catholic worker house there, and he does. And this is what it looks like. It's a place where the unhoused can stay for free. And as you can imagine, the the neighbors weren't super thrilled about it.
Yeah, he is a really fascinating character. I think that's a really great way into who Ammon Hennacy is, by just sort of dropping you in the middle of the life that he was leading. Like we said, he's the kind of person who really lives their conviction and isn't afraid to ruin their chance at like a normal middle class life for those convictions. But we should back up a little bit to talk more about where he comes from. He was a really interesting character in that he's raised by Quakers in Ohio, good Midwestern person. He became a committed Christian after he read the Bible, specifically the Sermon on the Mount, scores of times while in solitary confinement as a conscientious objector during World War One. Him being in prison is also very funny. There's like a story about how the jail was giving people rotten fish on Fridays, and he was really upset about that. So he led a big movement against it. And the people in jail, or the warden or whatever, they decided to put him in solitary on the false charge that he was going to blow up the prison, which I think is very funny. And so then in solitary, he read the Bible a bunch. And there's this great moment in his, I think it's his autobiography, where he's talking about how when he was reading the Bible, he decided that like Jesus was totally right, and like, yep, he was going to get down, he's going to be a Christian. But the trouble is, it would mean having to love everyone, including the warden. And he was like, that was the biggest hurdle. Is he was like, I could love everybody, I could love the guards, all my fellow prisoners, rats and perverts, he says, but like not the warden. So that was his spiritual discipline. So anyway, that's the kind of character that he is. He was a member of the IWW. We said earlier he was a wobbly. That factors into his life. The house that he starts is the Joe Hill house. Joe Hill is a wobbly martyr. And describing his conversion, Hennacy says, I read of Jesus, who was confronted with a whole world empire of tyranny, and chose not to overturn the tyrant and make himself king, but to change the hatred in the hearts of men to love and understanding. So pretty classic Catholic worker kind of story. Lots of parallels with someone like Dorothy Day, but actually some interesting differences too that we'll talk more about later. But just a really kind of person of his time in so many ways, I think.
Yeah, definitely. A person of his time, and also you can see why this would really appeal to 19-year-old evangelical me as well, right? You have this Jesus as a kind of countercultural person. And man, that's what 19-year-old evangelicals love. Jesus as this other kind of weird guy.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's some basic biography stuff. We're gonna flash back again to Salt Lake City. This is I guess it's the Salt Lake City framing, I'm pulling this from a local news source in Salt Lake City, so that kind of makes sense. But this is also like one of the kind of important dramas in his life. Dramas is probably the wrong word, but it's like, one of the the stories of his life that kind of gets told and retold about Ammon Hennacy. So it's not like this is coming out of nowhere. There's a lot of other things we could talk about too, like, when he did go to jail, or when he was in Arizona and he picketed by himself and all these kinds of things. But still, the Salt Lake City kind of stuff is sort of an important kind of thing to get a texture for like what he's about. So yeah, this is in 1961 in Salt Lake City. He opened the first Joe Hill house in a storefront on what is now Market Street in downtown Salt Lake City. Hennacy picked fruit in Bountiful to help pay the rent. People donated food and money, and local Unitarians and a few wards of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints offered help. He got his food by what is known today as dumpster diving, said Joan Thomas, who married Hennessy in 1965. Grocery stores also donated produce, which he would pick up on foot, pushing a grocery cart to and from the house, she said. I love that. That's a great part of the story too. Real Ammon Hennacy is the first Christian crust punk. That's kind
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
thing that I like about him.
That's right. I love his jean
Um,
jacket with all those patches.
Yeah, that's right. There's actually, I mean, it being Salt Lake City and all, and the strong Mormon population, there's a lot of interchanges between Ammon Hennacy and people involved in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Hmm.
And it's like really interesting to see those interchanges because sometimes, well, I mean, I don't know if you know anything about Mormonism. I don't know anything about Mormonism really, other than that there is like a strong sort of communitarian ethic in sort of some of the history of Mormonism and like the ways that those those general vibes kind of resonated with Ammon Hennacy and vice versa are sort of interesting.
Hmm.
That he wasn't always like outright what wasn't like outright rejected by by the Mormons or but other Christians might have looked at him a little bit differently. So sort of an interesting thing. But yeah, anyways, that's the Joe Hill house. The first one was a storefront, and they got food donated to them, and then dumpster diving. Pretty pretty Christian anarchist to me.
Sounds like it. Yeah. In addition to caring for the homeless and jobless and all the rest of those folks, Hennessy was also known for being loud about certain moral positions. For instance, he, like you said already, Matt, was a war resistor, tax resistor. He was a famous opponent of the death penalty. That was a really big deal. Not only did he not pay his taxes because he didn't want his money to go to the military, he also wrote a letter to the IRS each year explaining why he wasn't paying. So I love that. I love to imagine the person getting that letter every year and reading that, trying to figure out how to file that or what to do with it. He also, while he was running these shelters, the article says that Hennessy continued to protest against capital punishment. He led annual protests on the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. As the war in Vietnam intensified, he led anti-war marches that often ended at the Cathedral of the Madeleine because Bishop Joseph Federal supported the war. So that's great. When he arrived at Salt Lake City, Hennessy had written to Federal to explain his plans to open the Joe Hill House. In this conservative community, this is a quote from Hennessy, it is likely that folks have never heard of such radical Catholics. Federal responded plainly, I wish you to understand that your activities here do not have our approval, and the name of the diocese is not to be used in any way in connection with your actions. Unfortunate, but there you have it. A great sort of picture of Ammon Hennacy himself and his own relationship to all kinds of things at once. The one-man revolution, indeed.
Yeah, definitely. It's not going to get him down for sure. This one bishop, he doesn't care. Neat. So we have all this stuff going on, and it's just like, I mean, it presented in this way, it seems kind of like a whirlwind of things that this guy is involved in. These like Joe Hill houses, which there are 3 of that have to they keep getting shut down by the health department, and like they get reopened at different times. It's a whole situation that you can go learn about if you want to. But there's all that going on. There's all this anti-war stuff. I guess it just kind of speaks to the way that Ammon Hennacy interpreted sort of like, I mean, negotiated like how you move your types of belief and faith into action, and he just really did it in some very like explicit ways, which is cool, I guess.
Yeah.
And behind all that though lied a type of Christian anarchism. And okay, Christian anarchism is a really, I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast a handful of times before. We talked about Jacques Ellul and other folks, Leo Tolstoy, etc. And like, it's kind of strange. There's not like there's not like a program to Christian anarchism. There's not like a really like a philosophy to it necessarily either. I mean, there are sort of like philosophies of it and theologies of it, but like, there's nothing sort of solid, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So Hennessy, though, was like always self-describing himself as a Christian anarchist or a Catholic anarchist or one of the two, kind of depending on the time of his life, I guess. And it's never super descriptive or helpful, but this is how he this is how he puts it. Hennessy describes his anarchism by identifying with the Apostle Peter, who he said chose to obey God rather than the properly constituted authorities who placed him in jail, pointing to the victory of these men by courage and peaceful methods. His philosophy relied on voluntary cooperation to act for the common good. An anarchist is somebody who doesn't need a cop to make him behave, he'd say. That's a pretty famous line from
Mhm.
Ammon Hennacy. Um, it's a good line too. It's a cool one for sure. But these types of like cool lines that are at least a little bit, that are like they're kind of vague, is what I'm trying to say. But they give some like texture to at least what he believed and kind of like why he was doing things he was doing. So fundamentally against violence, first of all, for sure. Um, and Jesus was like a person who represented that for him in his life, but also other people too, like Tolstoy and Gandhi were these big
Mhm.
figures in Hennessy's life. um but also like against authority and against coercion of all types too, because those are extensions of violence, especially when they're done by the state. So all about voluntary cooperation and acting towards the common good. So that's like kind of like what's behind some of what he's doing, right? Like you don't need a state to show up and take care of people. You just need to open up your own hospitality house, and that's how you'll do it.
And if you're Ammon Hennessy, the state will just come shut you down when you're too rowdy.
And then you'll just open another one.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's end the biographical sketch, although there's tons and tons of stuff that you could say about Ammon Hennacy and his extremely wild life. From his hospital bed, this article says he dictated a final statement to Joan Thomas, saying, "Someday Christians of this state and other states will not take upon them the vengeance of the Old Testament God, but will do as Christ and Gandhi said to do, return good for evil. I've been picketing and saying this for the last 9 years in Salt Lake City and will continue to do so as long as I live." I'm not sure if there's a vestige of anti-Semitism in that particular line of
Yeah.
disparaging the vengeance of the Old Testament God. I know that Ammon Hennessy did struggle with anti-Semitism in his life, which was like something that he admits in his autobiography, but perhaps never sorted out. I don't know. Who could say? Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. I mean, at the very least, that type of framing is, I think, pretty prevalent in
Yeah.
some Christian pacifist writing.
Yeah.
There's always it always delineates the Old Testament God as something as an angry type of thing, and
Hmm.
yeah, I don't
It's a
know.
big Tolstoy
If
point.
not, yeah, totally, it is. Yeah, so it's there whether or not he intends it, but
Right.
it is
Um,
there for sure.
but I mean, those limitations are very important. I'm sure it would be really
Yeah.
interesting to look through Ammon Hennessy's own stuff and try to figure that out, especially in the context of the labor movement where he's coming from. Um,
Hmm.
Probably lots of interesting things to say about that, but things that I don't have the skill to talk about in this particular context. But in any case, what I do know is that so Hennessy died in 1970 in the hospital, but the way he got there was he was going to picket something, I forget what, but he had been like planning this picket for a really long time, and he had a heart attack on his way. And the heart attack, this article that I had read was like unsurprising because he had done a ton of like fasting and really hard labor, like manual labor and stuff. And so I guess like the walls of his heart were really weak as a result. So anyway, he ended up in the hospital and he was there for like 3 days or something before passing. But anyway, a really, like a very sort of heroic end in some ways to like die of a heart attack that you have because you just can't keep yourself away from going to this picket.
Yeah. There's in an essay from Dorothy Day that she kind of notes some things about his death, where she says, kind of talking about how important Joe Hill was to him as sort of the martyr of the IWW, and she's like, that's how he would have really wanted to go, is kind of like a martyr. But she's like, she says something like, his death wasn't not triumphant. He went down in this other really, kind of amazing way.
Mhm.
Um, so that's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, you get it though, right? Like he wants his life to mean something in the extreme, and
Mhm.
well, just short of being assassinated, I guess, going down because because you've picketed too hard is pretty good.
Yeah, that's right. Literally working yourself to death to stop all this bad stuff from happening.
Right.
Well, let's talk about Dorothy Day and her vision of Ammon Hennacy a little bit more. They were really close. They knew each other really well. Lots of important stuff in their relationship. What I think is so fascinating about Ammon Hennacy, though, is in the context of the Catholic Worker, which is, of course, a really broad movement that includes all kinds of people. People usually talk about like Dorothy Day and Peter Morin. Those are the two biggies. And then there's all kinds of like other characters sort of floating around in the Catholic Worker that are all very interesting. But Ammon Hennacy, I think, is one of the most interesting, probably because it just seems to me like he sort of uniquely doesn't fit in exactly right.
Yeah.
In ways that are actually very funny in some respects. So we should talk a little bit about Dorothy Day's perception of him. So she wrote a number of things about Ammon Hennacy. We've got a couple, but one is an article she wrote called The Conversion of Ammon Hennacy. And in it, she says this: many among us will call themselves personalists, libertarian, pluralist, regionalist, but he will always call himself anarchist. He is a pacifist and conscientious objector to all war and to all coercion. His picketing is to testify to his consciousness of the dignity and responsibility of humanity. He says, I may not change the world, but I will not let the world change me. I think that idea that he would always call himself an anarchist is really important. Dorothy Day and Peter Morin both occasionally would adopt the label anarchist, but in some pretty qualified sorts of ways. They would say something like, whatever, yeah, we're an anarchist, but like we're also like Catholics, or we believe everything the popes say, and also that the government is bad. That's a direct quote from Dorothy Day. Ammon Hennacy, though, what's so fascinating about him is I think the roles are somewhat reversed. Because he's an anarchist, he also ended up becoming a Christian, as opposed to the other way around, and that order of operations really stays with him in particular.
Yeah. Probably for the better. I don't know. It makes him a very interesting person. There's this thing though about Ammon Hennacy that's interesting, that he's just like, he's an anarchist first, and I think everything else second. And he's only ever a Christian insofar as that Christianity is anarchist. And I think it's a really interesting interpretation, or like it's an interesting way to move your to move your faith into your politics, and your politics into your faith. Because evangelical Christians will always talk about, you always have to be a Christian before all things, always putting Jesus first. But Ammon Hennacy uses anarchism to kind of read Christianity and to kind of like, craft a type of faith that works exactly for him and probably not for anybody else. Anyways, it's just like interesting to kind of note that that's kind of the setup that, at least from my perspective right here, it seems like that's how he's got his sort of Christianity worked out. And it is not the same type of Christianity that evangelicals would have, but it's a different way of kind of crafting a religion and like your practice of it.
Yeah, I mean, it is really tough to sort out the relationship between those two things, as anarchism and Christianity, because I feel like, I don't know exactly, but I just feel that Ammon Hennacy would probably say that he's ultimately a Christian. He would describe himself as a non-church Christian. Perhaps he would say that's his like controlling identity in some respects. But nevertheless, I think you're absolutely right to say that anarchism is the filter through which his Christianity is kind of viewed, or that he views it. I mean, maybe there's a dialectical relationship here or something, but it's tough to say. What's so fascinating to me about him is his own relationship to Christianity and Catholicism is really somewhat fraught. Like, he was baptized and received into the Catholic Church, but he was only Catholic for like 15 years, and then he left. And he sometimes draws from what he admits are like Orthodox Christian interpretations of certain doctrines, but the way that he applies them is kind of anything but Orthodox, or at least anything but like mainstream, you could say, depending on how you want to interpret that, I suppose. But there's a lot, like, if you read biographies of him or some other biographical articles, I was just reading one by this guy named Patrick Coy in a book called A Revolution of the Heart, where he says, hang on, let me find this quote. he says, Ammon Hennacy professed not to care about what happens in the afterlife or to be concerned about why what happens does. The point is to live now, to act now, and to do it here in the world. And this is a quote from Hennacy. I'm not at all interested in heaven. I feel that if I do what is right to the best of my knowledge and powers here, that will take care of itself. I think that's like a pretty good summation of Ammon Hennacy's like weird religious convictions.
Yeah, totally. There's a point in one of these Dorothy Day articles where she says that like he is not super like theological, and that makes sense. I mean, he's primarily, his Christianity is one that he, I think, developed mostly from reading the Bible in jail. Is kind of the vibe I get. And like that's kind of like the formative theological moment for him, and like that's where he's kind of drawing most of his, I think, like his Christian energy from, and his Christian self-understanding from, is reading the Bible. Himself in that context, and again, like through his own politics.
This Coy article, just to add a little bit more to that I think confirms it. Coy says, just as Hennacy refused to complicate his anarchistic vision with details, so he refused to engage in what he termed theological hair splitting. He goes on to say that Hennacy found a lot of meaning in the Catholic idea of grace, but he only infrequently spoke or wrote about his understanding of grace and never attempted to fit it coherently into his philosophy of the one-person revolution. This may have been a conscious oversight on his part, for he seemed to think that he was much too engaged in the concretization of the demands of the Sermon on the Mount to complicate matters with orderly theological reflections. So there you go.
That's great, though.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I can relate to that impulse for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to get weighed down in theology too much. That's cool. All right, well, here's a little bit more about from Dorothy Day about how she saw Ammon Hennacy. So there's this funny story where Dorothy Day and another Catholic worker take Ammon Hennacy to see this opera. And Ammon Hennacy, never seen an opera before, as you can imagine. I mean, me either, so it's fine. Anyways, they go see this opera. Ammon Hennacy is not impressed. He does not care about this opera. He is not moved by it. This is kind of the report. And then Dorothy Day says this: he weeps over reality, not fiction. He told me that when he saw I Was a Fugitive from Georgia Chain Gang, which is a movie, and fiction, but that's besides the point, I guess. He went home and he cried all night. I mean, it's a movie that's reflecting real life more than an opera, I suppose. He himself had been 3 years in Atlanta and 9 months in solitary confinement in the First World War for being a socialist and a pacifist. All men are brothers, he said, and brothers do not kill anyone. It was there in jail that his conversion began in reading the Bible as he found himself a Christian. So there you go. You get a little bit about what Ammon Hennacy is about. A real, like, I don't know, just someone really like bound up in the real struggles of life, and like, not like again, not like a 19-year-old evangelical me trying to be a Christian pacifist, an anarchist, just like abstractly against the war. Someone who's like actually invested in the resistance of war and the resistance of taxes, and like willing to go to jail for it. Say what you will about anarchism or whatever, but like pretty badass though. A pretty badass thing to do. Like just to believe something so intensely that you're gonna go to jail for it, that you're gonna like really put your life on the line. Like you've been saying the whole time, right? Surrendering yourself to live a completely not normal life because you believe in something, and that's cool.
Yeah. Well, I think in light of that, it's good to consider how Dorothy Day looks at the end of his life in this article, which I think is really neat. So she says of Ammon Hennacy, we'll talk more about this line, I think, later on, but she says, in him is no class war, no hatred of any kind. He tosses the word pipsqueak, a Shakespearean word, around rather freely, which is jarring to many, and he himself says of himself that he is a braggart. But he must speak of what he knows and what he himself has done and can do. He has been made a child of God and heir to the kingdom, and he is going to daily communion to increase the grace that is in him. He will indeed exalt like a giant to run the race. May he work more wonders than Gregory the Wonder Worker.
That Gregory the Wonder Worker bit is that's when he was, I think, baptized in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
It was on the feast day of St. Gregory.
That's awesome.
The Wonder Worker. That one.
Yeah, right. We all know him. We all know St. Greg. Yeah, I like that though because it just gives you a flavor of who Hennessy is. Just this goofy guy who just admits that he's a braggart, runs around calling people pipsqueaks. People are like, "What are you talking about?" And I like that. Just like a goofy character.
Yeah, totally. He is definitely a goofy character. All right, well, let's move on a little bit more then. That was all from the stuff we just have been reading. Is from an essay called "The Conversion of Ammon Hennacy" by Dorothy Day, and we're gonna move on to another essay that Dorothy Day wrote. Reflection, maybe not an essay, who knows? Called "Ammon Hennacy, a Non-Church Christian," which tells you a little bit more. I think about I mean, just the way that he reads his politics into his Christianity and vice versa, and like how that works out for him and well, doesn't work out for him in terms of Catholicism. But before we get into like some of the big stories, there's this kind of funny story about the way that Dorothy Day thinks or thought about Ammon Hennacy when he was kind of in the Catholic worker house in New York. So she says this: one of the great things that Ammon did for the Catholic worker back in the 30s, we began publishing in 1933, so that's when the Catholic worker newspaper came out, was to increase our ecumenical spirit. There's not much talk of ecumenicism in those days in the Holy Roman Catholic Church. His association with us began in the city of Milwaukee, where he was living at the time, and where he had a house of hospitality. Communists, socialists, anarchists, and an assortment of unbelievers and Protestants of who knew what denomination used to come to our Friday meetings. So I guess like what's funny, I guess, about this is that Dorothy Day is talking about how there wasn't much talk of ecumenicism in the Catholic Church during the 30s, except for Ammon Hennacy, who would bring around all of these like absolute weirdos to the Catholic worker house. I guess Protestants of who knows what denomination, fine, but also like atheists, anarchists, and socialists and communists. They're all coming over to the Catholic worker house for dinner.
Yeah, that's right. Some of that would have been certainly shared by Dorothy Day too, right? Who had been a CPUSA member and had a certain sense for collecting all kinds of different folks as well. But it is very funny to see Ammon Hennacy as like the guy running around inviting everybody to dinner. She goes on to say, before he came to New York to join us on the staff of the Catholic Worker, while he was still working at farm labor, he introduced us to the Mohicans, the Doukhobors, the Hutterites, and many other sects which had come to this country to escape war and conscription in their own countries. When he came to live with us, he began to attend the meetings of the War Resisters Leagues, meeting at community church, at Methodist churches, and with Jewish, Episcopalian, and other war resistors. He was interested, in fact, in all religious points of view if they resulted in a real effort to conform one's life to one's profession of faith. And I also love that about Ammon Hennacy. He's like, I don't know, I don't care what you believe, but like if you're willing to throw down, then like I'm interested. Whatever you're gonna do, as long as you like put up or show up, that's all that counts for Ammon.
Yeah, what can you say? It's good. It's a good way to think about it. It's cool. Yeah, I love this though. He seems like he's like really clued into the community. He seems like he knows all these like wild folks who have traveled to. I mean, the Doukhobors and the Hutterites and the Mohicans. They're all people who have come from Europe to kind of like like they probably came from Europe to escape the religious persecution of like being conscripted in the army in the first place, right? So they're here and kind of finding a common traveler with Ammon Hennacy. So pretty neat.
Mm-hmm.
Dorothy Day goes on to say a lot of things about Ammon Hennacy's anti-clericalism. He's a Catholic. He's he's in the Catholic workhouse, all these things, but he is like not a fan of Catholicism. Again, like as far as Catholicism is sort of on the same page of like the way that he understands Christianity and like who Jesus is as a person and as God. Things are cool, but like where they depart, Ammon Hennacy is like gonna let it rip and is ready to kind of throw down and critique them. And sometimes that was received really well in the Catholic worker and in the Catholic Church in New York, and sometimes it wasn't. Dorothy Day does tell this like quick story that like one time he just let a few sort of like a slight jab at the Catholic Church fly in a Catholic worker article, and that upset a lot of people in their community. But other times, not so much. So here's one other story that kind of runs contrary from Dorothy Day. She reports that one priest said of Ammon's anti-clericalism that perhaps he saw the sins of the church as a human institution far more clearly than we did. Another priest said of Ammon that he had received so great a light during that first jail sentence of his time in Atlanta Penitentiary that it had blinded him. He had read through the Bible 9 times and all but memorized the Sermon on the Mount. When he came out, he had become a Bible Christian, not in the sense of a sect, but of one who accepted the word, Dorothy Day says. So you get these two different views of Ammon Hennacy in this story, right? On the one hand, he's the guy that can see the problems with the church better than people in the church can. And the other one, he's this guy who's just like he's a little over the top. The light had blinded him and now he can't see anything but the Bible or something. So pretty cool. A pretty cool guy on these pretty cool takes about whether or not he's good or not in Catholicism.
Yeah, I mean that's what I love about Ammon Hennacy is he's just somebody who sticks to his guns. I think, regardless of how bizarre they are. And I mean, we're definitely getting Dorothy Day's gloss on Ammon Hennacy, right? Which is for better and for worse. But I think it's nice to refract him through Dorothy Day a bit because you can see where she's almost being like using diplomatic language to describe him in some ways, and I think that sort of says as much as needs to be said in some respects. She also says, trying to draw Ammon a little bit into their own movement, I think in a helpful way, that Peter Morin quoted Cardinal Newman saying, "If you wish to reach the man in the street, then go to the man in the street." The war resistors, she says, have a motto: "Wars will cease when men refuse to fight." Ammon went directly to people and persevered in friendship with them, though he soon realized that they were not going to go very far in building up a new society. And I think that's also a very funny Ammon Hennacy thing. It's like he's so idiosyncratic that this idea of the one-man revolution is like he's willing to go out in the streets and get anybody he can to get out there with him. But at the end of the day, like he has no intention and no belief that like people could actually build some sort of organized resistance or something like that. The best you can hope for is that you get everybody to like change themselves in some conversion or something like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, that's kind of his experience, right? Of like reading the
Yeah.
Bible in jail and like coming out the other side, this sort of different type of person. But that particular arrangement doesn't work out so well, as we've seen, historically speaking. People are bad at bettering themselves.
Yeah, people are bad at bettering themselves. They're even worse at that than they are at getting together and doing organized resistance. That's my feeling.
That's true. That is true. This is a little bit more about his sort of theological texture from Dorothy Day. She says one of Ammon's favorite quotations from Scripture was, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone," which is something that he ends up quoting a lot in the Book of Ammon. It's also like kind of like one of those like founding ideas in nonviolence, right? Like in judgment and sort of like the resistance of the state too. Like if if the state is going to start casting stones and accusing people of things in that kind of situation, like in a courtroom or whatever, right? Like who are they to do so? Because they're just enacting violence themselves, right? So that's kind of one of the scriptural ideas, I think, at the bottom of some of Ammon's thoughts. But anyways, Dorothy Day goes on to say, though, that was a "let him who is without sin cast the first stone" is a thought he used to speak in relation to judges, especially Judge Julius Hoffman, who's been sitting all these long months in Chicago in the Chicago 7 trial, which is of a dig into the history. But Chicago 7 trial is a big deal. Bobby Seals, a lot of other people were a part of it. Go read about Chicago 7 trial. It's not important for this exact episode.
Yeah, I mean, I love too that Ammon Hennacy was plugged into what was going on with the Black Panther Party and the Vietnam War and everything else. So it's all very funny. So Dorothy Day closes this one out saying, she says, "I must admit that Ammon was a great one to judge when it came to priests and bishops, and his words were coarse on many an occasion, so that it was hurtful to me to hear them, loving the church as I do. But there's that love-hate business in all of us, and Ammon wanted so much to see priests and bishops and popes stand out strong and courageous against the sin and the horrors and the cruelty of the powers of this world. but we cannot judge him, knowing so well his own strong and courageous will to fight the corruption of the world around him. What I love about this is it shows you the distance, I think, between Ammon Hennacy and Dorothy Day. That Dorothy Day really did want to be a good, faithful Catholic, for better and for worse, in a lot of respects. I mean, it's an amazing thing that she tried to sort all that out. But Ammon Hennacy was basically like, you have to earn my respect, and it's very easy to lose, I think, Ammon Hennacy's respect. And in that respect, he's also a really fascinating non-church Christian. Somewhat, again, like Benjamin Lay, right? Somebody who's not going to let his own faith community get away with doing things that he thinks are compromises with what Christianity calls you to do. And what I think I appreciate most is that Dorothy Day recognizes that distance, and she doesn't try to close it. Like, she doesn't try to say that actually they really think the same thing deep down, or like,
Right.
If only Ammon had been more like us or something. But she sort of lets him be who he is and says, yeah, like, we can't judge him. He did what he had to do. And I think that is a really also sort of model disposition from Dorothy Day, which I think a lot of Catholics unfortunately forget about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's cool. It sounds like I mean, I like that Dorothy Day is not just like lying about it or trying to have some kind of like false sense of unity with him when there isn't one. But it seems like she's someone that actually kind of respects him in a lot of different ways. So that's good. Okay, so we have Ammon Hennacy. We've kind of laid out his life a little bit. I mean, there's a lot more that we could talk about. There's a ton of stuff that we just don't have time to talk about on this podcast. But I think what we've done is kind of lay out a little bit about like kind of what he did in some aspects, right? The Joe Hill House. He was like this person that was basically like providing a place for people to live, which he thought was at the core of the gospel, which I think he's right, but it's the same. That's what he did, right? And sometimes he got in trouble for it. Sometimes it was fine. He was a war resistor. He didn't want to pay his taxes because he didn't want to go to the military, or he didn't want to go to capital punishment or something. All these things. And we have this some of these like theological textures too, where he's like this Christian that is reading a lot of Christianity through socialism, through the IWW, through anarchism, and through this like extreme dislike for any type of coercion. So we have all of these things. So now we have to figure out what we can say about him as a person and what he means. What does he mean to us? I don't know. Dean, what did we get from Ammon Hennacy? Like, what's the point?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough in some ways to figure out what you can get from Ammon Hennacy because he doesn't really offer you much more than himself. I think he tries to offer a lot of stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
if you read Ammon Hennacy, like he wrote a book called The Book of Ammon, which the title of which I feel like is already suggestive enough. But it's an autobiography, but it's also like a series of aphorisms trying to give you like good quotable lines to put on like your anarchist sandwich board or whatever. So there's that, but I think that really what he offers is himself in a certain respect, right? Like in the same way that Benjamin Lay, their lives kind of bear witness to the kinds of radical patterns of life that Christianity might lead you into. I think that is quite impressive. And I think there's like, I don't know, there's a lot of things where I disagree with Ammon Hennacy now that I wouldn't have back when I, like all the things I thought were especially exciting about Ammon Hennacy when I was a teen are all the things that I've sort of rejected as an adult. But you can't really get around the fact that at the end of the day, Ammon Hennacy is putting in the work. I mean, putting in the work so much so that eventually he'll have a heart attack of it. And I think that's what at least I get from Ammon Hennacy at this stage of my life, rather than in the past when I used to get, I don't know, a lot of good advice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, what was the good advice that you thought Ammon Hennacy was giving you when you were a child?
Yeah.
Your childish things.
Yeah, right. When I was still a tiny Christian baby, I think that connection between pacifism and anarchism was a big one. I also got a lot of really great quotable lines. Ammon Hennacy has lots of cool lines about how, like you said that one earlier, an anarchist is a person who doesn't need a cop to make them behave. I think that's really great. or at least I did at that time. I remember also there was this one line that he had that was something like addressing lawmakers, and he said, laws are bad because good people don't need them and bad people don't obey them. And back when I was a Christian anarchist, I was like, yes, exactly. That's exactly how it is. Now that I'm older, like I said, I sort of don't feel that way. But I do think at that time, he offers some quippy lines that are pretty suggestive in helpful ways. And also he offers an integrated Christian political life. No doubt about that.
Yeah, totally. I think that makes sense. I mean, looking back kind of on my intellectual development or whatever, being self-reflective for a moment, I think that Ammon Hennacy was a really good sort of like path away from a certain type of Christianity toward a different one. And just like you said, all those things were really important to me too, right? Like figuring out pacifism and Christianity and how using those two things together, you can become someone who rejects the state and rejects violence and all these kinds of things. But I think cool, like if that is something that like really works for you, then like great. I'm not trying to like diminish that at all. But for me, I guess this is a good way to kind of sidestep away from a type of liberalism towards more radical ways of thinking about Christianity. And that's a good thing. The thing that still sticks out to me about Ammon Hennacy though is like, I don't know. Maybe this just speaks to my my weak will and like bad character as a person or something. But like, can you imagine living your life where you just have like a set of values that you hold so dearly that you would just completely like wreck yourself for? It's kind of amazing. And
Yeah,
like
for sure.
it sounds like a joke, but like I don't know. I have a podcast where I talk about communism on it, right? But like in real life, if like some stranger approached me and like started asking me questions about communism, I'd be like really apprehensive to talk to them about it. I would be like really weird about it, I wouldn't be like super gung ho and ready to throw down about it like Ammon Hennacy might. So I guess all I'm trying to say is that the ability to like wear your the ability to wear your values on your sleeve and just to be like so completely into it is kind of amazing to me. It's maybe something I wish I was. I guess maybe I wish I was like that. I don't know. Maybe not, because I'm not like that. But it's like just an interesting like example of a way you could live your life that I think is pretty courageous and kind of heroic.
Yeah, I think so. I think, though, in a certain sense, that that virtue is also Ammon Hennacy's greatest vice, or the what's so
Yeah.
exciting about it is also what I think is exactly wrong with it in a certain respect.
Yeah.
Right. So, like the one man revolution, certainly Ammon Hennacy was a one man revolutionary force. I think that's true. But also the one man revolution did not end the Vietnam War, right? And probably went a really long way in helping to stop it. I wouldn't diminish the effort by any stretch, but at the end of the day, Ammon Hennacy does genuinely think that the revolution starts in everybody's heart, and from there, that's all you can really hope for. Which again, when I was younger, was great, but now that I'm older, I think is more. It's less realistic than hoping that you can get all the other people involved, which Ammon Hennacy thought was supremely unrealistic. So I think the heroic narrative of Ammon Hennacy is fantastic. I'm happy that he existed in the world, did what he did, but it's also kind of like the last thing that anybody needs in like actual political organizing circles too, in some respects.
Well, I guess if you're gonna end up alienating a lot of people, then yeah, you're right. I'm just saying it's cool that he was like really into it in this very serious way.
Of course.
Yeah, but no, I think you're right. The one man revolution, the waiting for everyone's hearts to be strangely warmed, like John Wesley or whatever, is keep waiting.
Yeah. But nevertheless, I don't know, Ammon Hennacy, I don't know, keep praying for everybody's hearts to change while you're in heaven, I guess, and we'll see. We'll see if the one person revolution can become a many one person revolution. I guess that's the Ammon Hennacy hope. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. We are really appreciative of everyone who does donate to us there. We have an extra podcast we do there once a week called The Lock-In, where we talk about current events. You can find that there. You can get a cool sticker if you donate at $10 a month for 3 months. Lots of good stuff you should check out at the Patreon. You can buy other stickers at our Redbubble store. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook at the Magnificast Basement, and you can send us an email at themagnificast@gmail.com. We'll see you next week. Oh, wait, shoot. Our music, by, as always, Maury Armstrong, and our outro is by the Illogical Spoon. See you next week.
Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late.